Hello, and welcome back to another Eduonics tutorial. In this section, we're going over beauty techniques in Photoshop. And in this video, we'll be going over eye depth and eye color. It's been said that eyes are the windows to the soul. That if you really want to get a sense of who a person is and what they want, you've got to look at their eyes. This is especially true in person, but it's also true in photography. When you have a photo of a person's face, even though it's not a living, breathing person in front of you, their eyes still command your attention. In fact, it's usually the first thing someone sees in a photo, whether they're consciously aware of it or not. That's why it's so important to make sure the eyes in our photographs are sharp, bright, and deep with color. Unfortunately, sometimes the eyes don't really pop in a photo. Even if you've done everything you can to capture them correctly, they still don't translate that vibrance on screen. So in this video, I'll be going over a few different things you can do to bring life to someone's eyes. I have a photo here of a woman surrounded in dollar bills. And while her eyes don't look bad, they're being overshadowed by the bright green colors of money. I'd like to do a few things here. I'd like to sharpen the irises, really bringing out their details. I'd like to brighten the eyes up, making them really shine. I'd like to add more detail from scratch, so I have more control over the details in the eyes. And finally, to give this photo a bit more of a statement, I'd like to change the color of her eyes to the same green that is shown in the dollar bills, making them seem like greedy eyes. Let's get started. The first thing I'll do is duplicate the background layer. To do that, I'll make sure that I have the layer selected. Then I'll hit Ctrl J on my keyboard, or Command J if you're on the Mac, to jump this layer up above itself. I'm going to apply the sharpness to this new layer. So I'll double-click its name and rename it to Sharpness. Now before I apply the sharpness, I need to get a closer look at these eyes. So I'll go over to the Tools panel and get my Zoom tool. Then I'll just click in the canvas a couple times till both eyes are taking up most of the screen. That's close enough. Then I'll hold my spacebar key and click and drag to position the eyes in the center of my workspace. That looks good. Now, to sharpen this layer, I'll go up to Filter, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask. I'd like to really sharpen up these eyes, so I'm only going to focus on the eyes as I adjust these sliders, and not worry about anything else. I'll bring the amount to around 200%. This is making the skin way too sharp, but I'm only focusing on the eyes. I'll make sure that the radius is at 5 pixels and that the threshold is at 0 levels. Then I'll go up and click OK to apply the unsharp mask. Alright, now my entire layer is incredibly sharp. I just need to isolate this effect into the eyes. I'll go down to the bottom of the Layers panel and click the Layer Mask button to apply a layer mask to my sharpness layer. And currently, since it's set to white, it's showing everything on my layer. I'd like to hide everything instead. So I'll make sure that the layer mask is selected, and I'll hit Control-I on my keyboard or Command-I on the Mac to invert the colors of this mask. Now we can't see the effects of the sharpness because the layer mask is completely black and is thus hiding the entire layer. Perfect. Now I'd like to show the sharpness again, but only in the eyes. To do that, I'll go over to my Tools panel and get my brush tool. I'd like to use a partly soft brush. So I'll go up in the Tool options and drag the hardness to around 50%. I'll make sure that my foreground color is set to white. Then I'll just start brushing in the sharpness in the eyes. This doesn't have to be completely perfect. I really don't need to be obsessing over it. But I am going to use this same layer mask for other effects throughout the tutorial. So the better I make this now, the better the end result will be. If I have to, I'll switch back to my zoom tool and get a closer look at these eyes as I brush them in. And there we go. The eyes are much sharper now. This looks perfectly decent, but it's probably a bit too much compared with the sharpness of the rest of the image. That's fine though. I'll just go over to the Layers panel and reduce the opacity of my sharpness layer to around 50%. That way I get half of the sharpness in the eyes without making them overwhelming. There we go. That's better. Now I'd like to brighten up these eyes a bit. To do that, I'm going to add a levels layer and adjust it so that the midtones and shadows are brighter than they were before. I'll go down to the bottom of the Layers panel, click the New Adjustment Layer button, and select a Levels Adjustment layer. Then, up here in the Levels histogram, I'll click this Midtones tab in the middle, and I'll drag this to the left a bit, just till the numbers below say about 1.50. Well, this is making things brighter, but it's making everything brighter. I just want this to affect the eyes. I'm going to need to copy the sharpness layer mask and apply it to this layer. To do that, I'll press and hold my Alt key on my keyboard, or Option key on the Mac, and drag my sharpness layer mask up to the levels layer mask. Now when I release my mouse, a dialog box pops up, asking if I want to replace the layer's current mask. I'm going to click yes, because that's exactly what I'd like to do. But I'm going to be replacing layer masks a few times in this tutorial, and I don't want this box to pop up every single time. So I'll click the box next to Don't Show Again, and then I'll click yes. Okay, it may be hard to notice, but my entire layer darkened down again, except for in the eyes. I can toggle this on and off by clicking the eye icon in the Layers panel. Now I'd like to add some more color detail to these eyes. I'm going to create a new blank layer. Then I'll make sure that I have my brush tool enabled. I'm going to set the brush options so that the size is around 7 pixels and the hardness is all the way up to 100%. Then I'm going to hold my spacebar and drag my image to the right so I can get a better look at these dollar bills over here. I'm going to set my foreground color to the same color as this green seal. To do that, I'll just click my foreground color swatch. Then I'll use the eyedropper to sample this green in the seal here. That's it. I'll click OK. Now I'll shift back over to the eyes. I'm going to use my brush to paint inside these eyes. I'll go in sort of a zigzag pattern around the pupil of the eye. It can be really rough. I'm just trying to create sort of a star shape. And it's completely fine if I go outside of the eye. I'll fix it in a minute. That looks fine. I'll go over and paint something similar in the other eye. That's great. Now I'll use my left bracket key on my keyboard to reduce the size of my brush. I'm aiming for around 2 pixels wide. Then I'll click my foreground color and sample some of this yellowish green in a dollar bill here. That looks about right. I'll click OK. Then I'll just go ahead and brush in basically the same thing. I'll make a small zigzag pattern around the pupil of the eye. It's good to make it a little bit random. It will end up looking more realistic that way. And I'll go ahead and make sure that this is on both of the eyes. Okay, great. I'm going to blend this layer with the other layers by going up to its blend mode. And I'll switch this from normal to overlay. All right, now it's blending better. But that green is still going outside of the eye. No worries. I'll just duplicate that layer mask again and apply it to this layer. To do that, once again, I'll press and hold the Alt or Option key if you're using a Mac and drag the layer mask from either the levels or sharpness layers, and I'll drag this to my current brush layer. Perfect. These eyes are starting to look better. I'll just blur the brushing that I did by selecting the layer. Then I'll go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Then I'll choose a radius somewhere between 1 and 2 pixels. And I'll click OK. Very nice. I think this layer is done. So I'll just double-click its name and rename it to Brushing. Okay, so this brushing detail added some color to the eyes, but it didn't quite fill them out. That's fine. I'm going to fill in the eyes right now. I'll go down to the bottom of the Layers panel and click the New Adjustment Layer button. Then I'll select a new black and white layer. I'm going to use this to color in the eyes, but I want it to be below the brushing layer. So I'll just click and drag it down in the Layers panel. And right now, this is affecting the entire image. But again, I only want it to affect the eyes. So once again, I'll hold my Alt key and drag my layer mask to this layer. Great. I'll click the black and white layer thumbnail. Then to colorize this, I'll just go up in the black and white properties and enable tinting. Now, to make this tint match the color of the money, I'll click the color picker for it. Then I'll sample the green seal on the dollar bill again. And click OK. Wow, this really did fill out the eyes. This is way more saturation than I need. So I'll go over to the Layers panel and reduce this layer's opacity to 30%. There we go. Much more realistic. For the final touch, I want to sharpen some other areas beyond just the irises of the eyes. So I'm going to directly sharpen some areas of my original background layer to make them pop. To do that, I'll just select my background layer and hit Ctrl J or Command J on my keyboard to duplicate it. I'm going to rename this to Sharpness 2. Then I'll go over to the Tools panel, right-click the Blur tool, that's the one that looks like a falling drop, and select the Sharpen tool. Now I'll just use this to sharpen a few things around the eyes, like the eyelids. I'm just going to bring a little more focus to the eyes by sharpening up those eyelashes and the lower eyelids, and just the general areas around the eyes. And remember, with the Sharpen tool, the more you use it, it increases in strength exponentially. So be careful not to go too overboard. Okay, maybe I went a little overboard myself. The Sharpen tool is just too fun to use. I'll go over to the Layers panel and reduce the opacity of my Sharpness 2 layer to around 50%. There we go. That's a little more realistic. All right, the eyes are finished. It's time to see what my before and after looks like. I'm going to get my Zoom tool, and I'll press and hold my Alt or Option key and click a couple times in the canvas to zoom back out to my original size. And while I'm holding that key, I'll go ahead and click the eye icon in my original background layer to hide all the other layers above it. So here's my before, and here's after. Wow, look at those eyes pop. They're the same green as the seal on the dollar bill, but somehow they stand out much, much more. It looks great. I'm very satisfied. So, in this tutorial, we went over how to sharpen the irises, really bringing out their details. We went over how to brighten the eyes up, making them shine. We also added more detail from scratch, so we'd have more control over the details in the eyes. And finally, we gave this photo a statement by giving her green, greedy eyes. That will do it for eye depth and color. I'll go over teeth whitening and straightening in the next video.